Hey, my name is Roy Canterbury. I'm going to be your host today on Archer Talk 101. And what we're going to learn today is the correct way to release the string on your bow, also referred to as loosing your arrow. For start with, we're going to start off with fingers. That's kind of the original way to do it. But for fingers, you're going to take the string that's going to be held back on the pad between your first joint and the tip of your finger between there on your first three fingers of your index and your middle and your ring finger. And what you do is you put the string there, you drop back, and you're going to draw back to the corner of your mouth with your index finger. And then now, while you're getting ready to release the bow, you don't just open your hand up because that will move the string in a different angle. What you want to do is, as you're holding your bow, start relaxing your fingers and pull your hand back across your face and back to your shoulder. Now, it depends on how flexible you are. Some can touch your shoulder. I can't really do it because my arm's not quite that flexible. So once again, you draw back, you get to your anchor point with your index finger to the corner of your mouth. And then as you get ready to release, relax your fingers as you slide them back across your face and back towards your shoulder. So that's the first way to do it, is with a release. And then you have your strap-on releases where you're going to have it strapped onto your wrist, and there you're going to hook up to your loop. The best way to do it is from a loop, because you don't want to have uh, different arrow flight. That'd be another session here to talk about how to do that. But what you're going to do with that is you're going to take your loop, and you will hook your release to your loop. Now, some have just a little hook, which I like to do for hunting, because then you can just find it without looking at it. You know where the hook is at. You find your loop, and now you can just hook right up to it. The other ones are calipers that you actually open the jaws up and clamp around it. Those are double jaws or single jaws. The double jaws, both jaws will move. And on the single one, only one jaw will move. Now, once you get hooked up to it, when you draw back, you want to put your finger behind the trigger, because if it's in front, you actually have to touch it, and now it's going to release that. Okay, so you want to have it behind the trigger so that you don't have to worry about accidentally pulling the trigger. Now, what you're going to do is your anchor point is going to be the knuckle on your index finger is going to go back to right behind your ear. There's a little pocket underneath your earlobe at the back of your jaw. So as you draw back, you're going to draw back to that point. So that's why you want to keep your finger there. So as you draw back, you're going to go across your cheek, or come in, however you're going to draw back. Put that finger in that pocket. Now, what you're going to do is, a lot of people try and fire with just the tip of the finger. Well, that's incorrect. You want to go all the way up to the second knuckle. Let your hand roll down so that you're on the second knuckle, not the first one. So now you're back at your anchor point, and now you're going to start pulling back with your back muscles. So it's like kind of squeezing your shoulder blades together. So you're going to come back to that point with your finger on the trigger. Now, don't move your finger, but just put slight pressure on it, and now just pull, and then it will fire. Okay, it should be a complete surprise for you. If you know when it goes off, you're pulling the trigger, and you don't want to be doing that. One way to see what a good release feels like, I used to do this a lot when I was teaching, is you would have them draw back, put their finger above the trigger, and they would just concentrating on aiming at the target, aim at the target, and then you would actually pull the trigger at some point. And that would be a total surprise to them, because they didn't know when you were going to be pulling the trigger. Now, the next one is going to be handheld ones. And those are hooked up. Those are almost always hooked up on a loop. There's not many of them unless they had swivels that you could actually hook to the string. So you're pretty much always going to use a loop for those. Now, what I like to do is put it completely into your hand so that the release is right just below your knuckles and before the first joint from your hand back. So hold it in there. That gives it a good grip. So right in there. So as you pull back, it's going to go right about where those first knuckles are at. Now, you don't want to use your thumb to actually fire it. There are some that have the big knurled thumbs on them, and you think you pull them with your thumb. Well, you still don't pull them with your thumb because you have less dexterity and less control of your thumb than you do your index finger. So why use something that has harder to control? Now, you're still going to come back to the same anchor point, but instead of the index knuckle, you're going to use, as you turn your hand over, you're going to use either the middle finger knuckle or the ring finger knuckle. Depends where you're going to do it. That's why I like to have like a kisser button and touching nose. So it doesn't matter which way you're anchoring, your hand can turn any direction. Now, what you're going to do on those, a lot of them will have a place you can put your thumb that doesn't actually fire it. If you look at the releases, there's a spot you put your hand, you have your trigger back behind there. Now you're going to put your thumb rather, on your release, and now the same thing. You're going to just put a little pressure on it and start pulling back with your hand. Now your hand will kind of rotate a little bit as you're pulling back. When you get to a point, then that release is just going to go off and be a surprise to you. Now there are some that have, like I said, the knurled knobs on them, and there are multiple different releases, but you can fire those the same way. On the one I use most of the time, I took the knurl off because I don't use it anyway, and it just kind of gets in the way. I do have another handheld release that has the knob on it, but I don't really use it. I put that trigger goes in the joint between my index finger and my thumb is where those go. And those are where you'd fire them the same way. Now that my two releases have different pressures on the triggers, so you have to go through and pull and then go through. Now, what will happen with a little bit less expensive ones, you will feel that trigger move, and you'll have a tendency sometimes to all of a sudden start thinking about that trigger because you're feeling it moving. That's why on my main release that I use all the time, it has a real hard trigger. And, if you look at it when I'm actually pulling the trigger, it's just a very slight movement. You can't even really see it moving before it fires. Where some of the other ones, to fire them, you have a lot more opening of the jaw. You have a lot more movement. So that's the three types of releases and the way to actually do it correctly. The reason you want to do that correctly, have a surprise fire, is your main job is to just focus on the aiming portion of it and let your back muscles do the firing. Use your fine motor skills for aiming, and then not use your fine motor skills for actually pulling the trigger. Unlike a firearm where you will use the tip of your finger because you're doing it a little bit different way. So that's kind of the difference between them. You want to try this out, and of course you can always join the Archery Talk 101 Facebook group. I'll leave a link down below for that. Get in there, and you can always ask questions in that group. You can always post your questions, your answers, and even post a video, and they'll get reviewed by somebody. That's what we want to do, and let's have a lot of fun in archery.